What a disappointment. Hey guys, welcome back. Okay, so we need to talk about Ali Hazelwood's Love to Loathe You novella series. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more book videos. Also, this video will contain spoilers for all three of these novellas, so be aware if you haven't read them yet. Okay, so first things first, each of these novellas can be read as a standalone. The three of them are Under One Roof, Stuck With You, and Below Zero. Now, in each of these novellas, there are three female main characters, Mara, Sadie, and Hannah, and all of them are best friends from grad school, and they're each the main character in their own novella. So I don't feel like it's necessary to read the books in any particular order to be able to know what happens in the previous novella. Like, it has no real impact on the next novella. There are brief conversations and like passing mentions of each of the friends in each of the books, but it doesn't really have a large impact on the story. I do have to say that if you read them out of order, the second one, Stuck With You, and then the third, Below Zero, they do have some like quick scenes of the main characters from the book previous. So you'll know, like, they'll spoil the fact that those characters got their happy ending. But that shouldn't be a surprise since they're romance novels, so that means it's pretty obvious that the characters are going to end up together in the end. And then secondly, I have some complaints that I just need to get off my chest real quick, and this applies to all three of the novellas. In general, my problem with Ali Hazelwood is that all of her main characters are the same. It is the quirky girl and the quiet type guy. Every girl is tiny and every guy is this huge guy. And then personality-wise, all of the characters just feel the same. They're smart and they have jobs in STEM, which I do like, but it's all the same. And then they all have like some random quirk about them that makes them a little bit different from the other female main characters, but generally they're the exact same character, except their hair colors are different. And then it's the exact same with the main male characters. They all have this fancy high-up job and they're excelling in their field and they're the best of the best, and professionally they're envied by everyone. And then physically, they're all, like I said, they're all big as mountains. They're super wide shoulders and they're so tall, and oh my God. Like, the way she writes them, it's just kind of like the characters are just like, oh my God, he's so tall. There's only so much that I can read about the female main character talking about like, oh my God, he's so tall, that like I can handle. Like, after reading 3 novellas in a row where the exact same thing happens with the descriptions, it gets a little like, okay, can we have some variety? I would be somewhat forgiving of her like recycling these physical descriptions for the main characters. Like, clearly she has a type for what she prefers and like what she wants to write about, you know, which is fine. But my problem is that like she keeps constantly commenting on this like throughout the entire book, and is so obsessed with talking about how tall he is, and it just grates on my nerves. And my thing is like, mention it once and then don't mention it again and move on. So with all of that said, let's get into breaking down the individual novellas. So I'm just gonna go through them each, and I'm gonna say what I thought was bad about each one, and then what I thought was good about each one. So the first one was Under One Roof. This was released first in June of 2022. So this novella focused on Mara and Liam. They have both inherited Liam's aunt's house. Don't worry, Mara and Liam aren't related. Liam's aunt was Mara's mentor, so that's how Mara got tangled up in that. So Mara just moves in, and they need to navigate living together in this shared house. Of course, they don't adapt well to each other at first, and throughout the book, we are constantly jumping forward in time, like weeks and then months at a time, seeing all of these like small moments between them. And this one was definitely my least favorite of the three. So starting with the bad, right off the bat, I hated the prologue. The prologue opens up with ruining the big moment of the two main characters getting together. I don't understand why you would put this in the prologue. It just literally opens up with the beginning of their sex scene, and so you know how it's going to happen, and it just starts out, and I do not understand why you would start a book this way. I was very annoyed right off the bat. Second, with this one, I think that specifically this first novella did not work as a novella. I feel like the story jumped forward so much in time that every single chapter felt cheap, and I felt like I was missing too much of this story because I was. Like, I would get little snippets of all these things that had been happening, but you didn't actually get to read any of these scenes. You were just told that all of these things happened, and it felt so empty. Thirdly, this is a big one. This is the biggest one for me, and the reason I hated this book the most. The main male character, Liam, was so fucking weird. Like, okay, so Ali, the author, tried to do like the sunshine, grumpy trope, but instead of Liam being like grumpy, he came across as awkward as fuck, and not in like a cute, attractive way. Like, he kept stumbling over his words and he could barely form sentences. Like, I had a very hard time believing that this guy was a successful lawyer. And then, of course, God, the smut was terrible. I hated this smut in this book so much. I think this book had the most uncomfortable smut that I have ever read. Like I said, first from the prologue, we knew when and how it was coming. So basically, Liam started having sex with Mara without any sort of like build up or like cute moments. He had heard her talking on the phone with her friends about how much she found him attractive, and he saw that as the green light. He just came up to her and just started doing stuff to her, and it was so awkward. There wasn't even like a first kiss. It's just insertion. And then she comes immediately just from him entering her for like 1 second. Like, that's believable. And then they go upstairs to continue. And again, in true fashion, he is fucking unbearably weird. He says he doesn't have sex and he's unsure if he's clean, basically, even though he was already inside of her. I hated this so much. Like, this is a conversation that we have before there's insertion. But obviously, from the way he just started doing it with her, there wasn't any sort of conversation or build up or anything. And this whole thing just bothers me. And this is like the one time in a book where I'm like, no, there shouldn't have been any smut in this book. Like, it was terrible, mainly because it was terrible, and we had no relationship buildup that made me excited for the characters to finally like be together. I felt like this book should have ended with just like a nice, sweet first kiss, and that's it. Now for the good. So not much good for me to say, honestly. This novella took me way longer to read than it should have with how short it was. Like, I think in total it probably only takes like maybe like less than 2 hours to read, and it took me days to get through this. I just didn't want to read it when I was. I mean, like, I don't even feel like the plot was very inventive. I've said this before in past videos. It just feels like the plot of Twice Shy by Sarah Hogel, and it kind of bothered me that it was just kind of the exact same plot for the most part. But I think Twice Shy was way better. There were some funny moments, like I liked Mara's inner dialogue, or I liked Liam and Mara like sitting on the couch watching Bachelor together. But this isn't enough to make me like the book. And like, honestly, I think the book would have been like fine. Except I literally cannot get over that horrible sex scene. That for me completely ruined the book and made me just like forget everything that I somewhat liked about it and then just be like, nope, that book was cringy and awful and I hated it. So that leads us into the second novella, which is Stuck With You. This one was released in June of 2022, and I was not in a rush to read it because I didn't love the first one. But then I did get around to reading it, and I was happy that I found it to be more of an enjoyable read than Under One Roof. So for this one, we have the two main characters, Sadie and Eric. They work together in this same building, and then after an encounter in a cafe, they go on a first date, and then they hook up. And then after the date, Sadie basically just ghosts Eric. And then we're not told the reason of this until like the end of the book. So throughout the book, it's alternating between like their meeting and their date and their interaction together when they're stuck in this elevator. And they're stuck in the elevator because the power goes out. And then basically they're forced to talk about why she ghosted him. Okay, the bad. The main character's physical character description was so annoying. This one was the worst, I think, out of all three. The constant physical description of Eric drove me up a wall. It was constant. I felt like she kept describing him as this large Nordic man, and it was so weird. Like, after the first time of you telling me what he looks like I'm good. Like, I'll remember what he looks like. That's fine. You know, like, you don't need to keep shoving this description of what he looks like down my throat. And I literally feel like I have to just read like a snippet of how she keeps describing him, because it was, I was just so annoyed because I'm like, I get it, girl. I get it. Like, he's tall and he's blonde and he looks like a Viking. Like, okay, great. Blonde, massive, Viking-like glory. For no real reason other than because of how striking he looks. He's just so Scandinavian, maybe? Viking-like, Norse. Like his ancestors frolicked below the Aurora Borealis on their way to funding IKEA. He's as big as a Yeti with clear blue eyes, a short, pale blonde hair, and I would bet my gift croissant that his name contains one of those cool Nordic letters. He looks like a corporate version of Thor, like Platinum Ragnarok. I wish he'd smile at me instead of just observing me. I'd feel less intimidated. Like, she does this in the other stories as well. I don't know why, it just felt so much more prevalent in this one. Like, I felt like she was trying to be like cute with like her different ways that she was like comparing him and like describing him in his description, but for me it just was taxing. Okay, and then another thing I didn't like about this one was the conflict in the story of why Sadie ghosted Eric after their date. I just felt like it was so stupid. So we find out that Sadie was mad because she thought that Eric's company had stole one of her company's clients, but then you find out that it was like unintentionally his fault. Like yes, they stole the client, but like he didn't do it deliberately, and she thought that he had done it deliberately. Which, like, if you want to be upset by losing the client, fine, but don't be childish and ghost him when he doesn't even know why you're ghosting him after you had like a really nice date. Like, I hate that shit. Like, I'm a firm believer of like direct conversations to sort out an issue. And I hate in books when there's miscommunication that's done poorly, or when the characters are childish and they just avoid talking about things. Like, it's just not my style. And like, obviously she needed some sort of conflict as to why they weren't talking. I just feel like the conflict could have been done better, instead of the character just blatantly being like, he used me just to get my client, instead of like actually confronting him and being like, hey, what's up with this? Like, I don't know. I feel like there could have been a different conflict in the story versus that, because I felt like that was just kind of like not well done. Now for the good, I actually did like the overall plot. Like, I liked the premise of the story. I felt like it worked as a novella. I liked seeing how the two main characters met in this cafe and they hit it off. And then like the same day they went on a date and then they hooked up. And you could tell that they had a lot of chemistry. He got ghosted, which obviously I didn't love that part. But then I liked that they were stuck in an elevator together and she was basically forced to discuss the issue. I liked that the book alternated between like their time in the elevator and then on their date. Like I thought it was nice. I thought the pacing was really good and like I didn't feel like the book needed to be longer than what it was. It felt like it was the perfect length to focus on basically just the 3 interactions that they had, like meeting, going to dinner, and then being in the elevator. And then another thing I liked about this one was like, I thought that the smut actually worked really well. I felt like the chemistry between the 2 main characters and then having them like bang right after their date, I thought it was very natural. I didn't feel like I really needed more storyline to like really root for them to like be together or anything. Like I felt their chemistry. I felt like they had a lot in common. And we got to see this when they were on their date. I thought they had good conversation. And they seemed to be like a really good fit together. So for me, it felt very believable that they would be into each other after their first date because like they had a lot in common and they got along really well. Overall, this novella wasn't anything like pivotal or amazing or anything, but like I did think it was a nice, quick, enjoyable read, especially with like the smaller plots, with it kind of taking place over just like a date and then them talking in the elevator. I was glad that it wasn't longer and more drawn out because it would have, I feel like, gotten boring. Like I feel like it was like the perfect length for everything that had happened. Okay, last is Below Zero. So this one was released in July of 2022. It focuses on the 2 main characters of Hannah and Ian, and they meet when Hannah interviews him for a class that she's taking. So he works for NASA, and this is her like dream to work for NASA. And then they end up hitting it off after their like little interview, but Hannah doesn't date, so nothing develops further. And then years later, they meet again because Hannah gets a job at NASA, and then conflict. Hannah gets mad at Ian because he tries to stop her from going on this dangerous Arctic expedition. And then once the expedition goes wrong, guess who's there to save her ass? Okay, so the bad for this one, again, the same with the first one, I felt like the smut was kind of weird again. Like, not as horrific as Under One Roof, but still a little weird. Like, so I liked the idea of them hooking up right away after they met the first time, like after they had their interview, like they hit it off. But like, basically they just dry humped in his office. I've never, it was just kind of weird. Like they just kind of dry humped and then, you know, both came in their pants and that was it. So that was our first sexual encounter. And then they had an actual sex scene like after they were together at the end of the book. And he just kind of kept comparing her body parts to like things on Mars, which was weird. I mean, like if you're into Mars, like maybe that would be like cute or something. But I'm not. So for me, like that just wasn't cute. So another bad aspect that I didn't love. So before I mentioned that Ian had wanted Hannah to not go on this dangerous Arctic expedition for NASA. It was her proposal and he was like on the board of the proposals or something, and he denied her proposal for the project, but then she ended up getting funded a different way. So she goes on this expedition and she's out exploring in the Arctic alone. There's like one other person in their back at like their base or whatever. So she's out in the Arctic. She falls in this crevice. She twists her ankle. And then she's basically just thinking that she's going to die. And this is where I feel like the plot got a little weird. So Ian is just in the Arctic. He starts talking to her through the radio and is saying that he's coming to save her, and she's all confused, and she's like, why are you randomly in the Arctic? And then he rescues her and brings her back to his boat in the Arctic, and it just felt really far-fetched. Like, he has this boat in the Arctic and he took time off work to hang out on the boat just in case she needed rescuing. And then, like, the whole time when he's on the way to save her, like, over the radio, and then after he saves her, she keeps being like, why are you here? Why are you here? What are you doing here? Like, oh, well, you're not on this mission. What are you doing here? And it's like, obviously he's here because he cares about you and he didn't want you to die. Like, are you daft? Like, obviously he likes you and he's here to save you. And like, she just keeps being like, why are you here? But then it does make a little bit of sense because it's like, yeah, why are you just randomly in the Arctic? Like, that's not just something that like people do. And so before she went on this expedition, he even had like a conversation with her about how dangerous it was and like how he was worried about her. So my thing was like, why are you so surprised that he wanted to save you? But then I get it because we go back to that same thing where it's like, why do you have a boat in the Arctic? Like, even Hannah thought that was like unbelievable. Like, the plot should have just been that he added himself to the project and that's why he was there. That would have made so much more sense than him being like, oh yeah, I vacation here sometimes. It's like, no, you don't. That's weird. Like, I really wish that she would have just had him make himself a part of the expedition versus just like being on his boat in the Arctic. It just felt weird. Really, those were kind of only the two things that I didn't love about this one. I did like this novella, I think the best out of all of them. So now for the good things. First of all, the main character, Ian, he's a redhead. Need I say more? There are not enough redheaded heroes in books. Love redheads. And then also, I don't remember her harping on how tall and big he was the whole time, so also that's a bonus. I liked how he was reserved and kind of like awkward, but in a cute, normal way, and not like in an off-putting, creepy way like Liam was in Under One Roof. I hate that guy. So I think he really was my favorite male character throughout the 3 books, and then Hannah was my favorite female character throughout the book. So I think that kind of makes this one my favorite. For Hannah, I loved that she wasn't always like super amazing and smart at everything. Like, in the beginning, we learned that she was like a pretty shitty student for a long time until she realized what she wanted to do. And she realized that she had like the goal of wanting to work for NASA, and then she had to work her ass off to get there. And I also liked that she kept everyone at arm's length. Like, she didn't want to be super close with Mara and Sadie in the beginning of their friendship. And then also she declined wanting to date Ian in the beginning after they met. I felt like she was a relatable character, and I think in her book, she showed the most growth over the short period of time in the book. By the end of her book, she realizes how much she cherishes her friendships, and she's also ready to try out commitment with Ian. So really do love that personal growth. So now, since all 3 are released, if you haven't read them yet and you plan on it, like I said before, they can be read as standalones. I would recommend reading them all 3 back to back. I think that would really help with the character development for the main female characters. I feel like reading about the friends in each previous book and getting snippets of them in the next book really did help with figuring out like their individual personalities. And then since a novella is so short, it's so hard to get to know the characters in such a quick amount of time. So after reading all 3, and by the time you got to Below Zero, all of the main characters had come together after Hannah is saved. They all met up like in person for the first time, like throughout the books. And for me, since I read these books like months apart, so much time had passed between reading all 3 that I didn't feel that like friendship connection between the characters by the time I got to them seeing each other in person by the end of the 3rd book. Like, I liked the idea of them being all connected and having like this bond throughout all 3 books, but I didn't feel the connection. I do feel like if I would have read each book like immediately after the other ones, they would have really built on each other more, and I would have like really felt their friendship more than like it just being a standalone. Now I have to talk about the smut again. I think for the smut, it just simply comes down to taste. I don't think it's going to hit for everyone. I think the author very clearly finds some things sexy that I think are cringy as fuck. But there might be some people out there who are into it. Some of the things that I said before that I didn't like during these scenes, it's just all due to personal preference. So I do have to say that, like, overall, although the novellas were not what I was originally hoping for, I was very excited to read them. I loved the love hypothesis. And I just thought that they would be more like the love hypothesis, but they just felt different to me. But I was very excited because at the end of each novella, they did include the first chapter for Love on the Brain, her next book. It's the full-length novel that's coming out August 23rd of 2022. And being able to read that first chapter of that new book was totally worth the cost of buying the novella. I was so excited when I got to the end of one of the novellas and I saw that they included this chapter. I was like, what? And I read it immediately and I was hooked and I wanted to keep reading, and I was so sad that I only had one chapter. So already from reading the first chapter, you know that the next book is going to be like her same typical formula, like STEM-based, enemies to lovers, probably a tiny, you know, sunshine female main character and the huge grumpy main male character. But after reading that first chapter, I do think I'm gonna really like it. I was really drawn in and I already felt like I got more set up for this next story in that one chapter than with like all of the other novellas as a whole. I really do think Ali is good at full-length novels. I think that the stories and the characters need that space to breathe and to grow versus where everything just feels so rushed with novellas. So after reading that first chapter for Love on the Brain, I'm just very excited. But overall, it does bum me out, these novellas, just because I feel like if they would have been written as full-length novels, I would have really loved them. But since they weren't, I didn't love them. I don't know. I just feel like it's one of those things where, like, if she releases a full-length novel once a year, I wish she would have just taken like the next 3 years and just expanded on each of those novellas and just made them full-length novels over the next 3 years, and I would have been happy with that. So that is it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching and spending your time with me. I really do appreciate it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.